This isn't just a story about a bad seed. It's a chilling look at a catastrophic failure of parenting that turned a child into a terrifying monster. His name is Derek, and the woman who brought him into the world, his own mother, was so gripped by fear she felt like a prisoner in her own home. How does a little boy become his parents' worst nightmare? What drives this kind of monstrous behavior? And where does the fault truly lie for creating an uncontrollable terror? This is a horrifying true crime case that serves as a stark warning. The dangers of ignoring clear problems and raising a child without boundaries. If you're a parent, or ever plan to be, what you're about to hear is a masterclass in what not to do. Try to recognize the mistakes in this story and vow to avoid them. But before we plunge into the darkness, please take a moment to support the channel. Subscribe, hit that like button, and stay active in the comments. It helps more than you know. Thank you. I'm genuinely grateful. Let's begin. Derek Anthony Campos was born on November 13, 1991, in Marshfield, Wisconsin, the small town that would become the setting for this tragedy. His mother, Shelley, was only 19 and a first-year nursing student when she became pregnant. She felt too young, completely unprepared for motherhood. Everything had accelerated too fast. She hadn't even finished her degree or enjoyed her new adult freedom before her belly began to swell. Yet, Shelley made the decision to keep the baby and drastically change her life. She was facing it alone, as the child's father vanished the moment he learned of the pregnancy. When Derek was born, Shelley's world was irrevocably changed. She adored her son. He was a gorgeous, happy baby whose chubby cheeks, she believed, could melt any heart gazing at him. Shelley was convinced she'd made the right choice, unafraid of any obstacle. But when Derek was only 7 weeks old, disaster struck. The baby became critically ill, suffering from a severe respiratory virus and pneumonia. He was so close to death that doctors weren't sure he would survive. Time was running out, and the child had to be urgently airlifted to a hospital in Minnesota. Shelley was utterly consumed by horror, believing she would lose her son. The entire journey was a desperate prayer that he would have the strength to hold on. Against the odds, a miracle happened. Derek recovered. Shelley was overwhelmed with relief and happiness. The fact that her little boy had faced death and pulled through fundamentally altered his future. From that day forward, a terrified Shelley made a vow. Derek would get everything he wanted, whenever he wanted it. The sheer fear of loss was a constant, crippling presence in her life. Shelley decided to give Derek everything in her power. On the surface, this sounds like the love of any normal, devoted parent. But in Shelley's life, this devotion took a dark, destructive turn. Initially, things seemed fine. Derek grew into a typical toddler, playing with balls, learning to ride a bike, and enjoying walks with his mom. But Shelley continued to spoil him relentlessly. As the boy aged and grasped that the world revolved entirely around him, he began to exploit it. That's when the real trouble started. Even in his early years, Derek displayed significant behavioral issues. By age 7, he was incredibly defiant, cursed with a terrible temper, and refused to obey his mother. He argued constantly, standing his ground with outbursts that went far beyond typical tantrums. One day, Shelley took him to the mall for groceries. Passing the toy section, Derek spotted bright, attention-grabbing toy trucks. The boy immediately ran to the shelf, grabbed a truck, and handed it to his mother to purchase. Shelley put the truck back down, calmly stating that he had enough trucks at home and they were only there for groceries. Her refusal sparked the biggest meltdown of his young life. Derek grabbed the toy truck and began smashing it repeatedly against the floor until it shattered into hundreds of pieces. But he didn't stop there. He looked up and threatened his mother. If she didn't buy him a truck, he would break another toy in the store. Shelley was paralyzed with shock. Her son was causing a massive scene, screaming so loudly that other shoppers stared and shook their heads in disapproval. In that moment, Shelley knew she had failed. She should have established firm rules and made it clear this behavior was intolerable. But she didn't. Her crippling fear, the promise she'd made after he nearly died at 7 weeks, took over. So Shelley bought him a brand new toy truck and paid for the one he had destroyed. That incident taught Derek a deadly lesson. He could demand anything from his mother. This pattern intensified. The tantrums evolved. Derek became aggressive. When his mother attempted to explain anything to him, he would lash out with screams and fists. Every single time, his wishes were eventually fulfilled. By constantly giving in, Shelley was actively reinforcing his bad behavior. The word discipline simply did not exist in Derek's vocabulary. He was the perfect example of a spoiled, unchecked child. As the years passed, Shelley noticed unsettling oddities in her son's behavior. For instance, he didn't play with his toys like other children. Instead, he would meticulously empty a box, neatly line up the toys in front of him, and then simply sit and stare at them. Once bored, he'd pack them away. Derek also had a strange fixation with food. He would never eat anything with his hands. Burgers, potato chips, donuts, sandwiches, all consumed with a fork. Shelley didn't understand why, describing it as simply something strange. She never once considered that her son might have special needs requiring professional medical attention or evaluation. No, she simply dismissed her son as quirky. All these seemingly minor, but potentially critical, red flags were utterly ignored. Furthermore, Derek was struggling desperately at school. He had immense difficulty socializing and making friends. He grew up lonely, isolated, and incredibly awkward around his peers. He would often display aggressive outbursts toward children and adults alike. If someone did something he disliked, he would clench his fists and shake violently, a truly unsettling sight. Once, when a classmate came over, Derek laid out all his toys and began his ritualistic staring. The guest, reaching for a toy car, unknowingly set off a trigger. Derek loathed anyone touching his things. He did not know how to share. This innocent move sparked a torrent of pure rage. Derek lunged at the boy, knocked him to the floor, and began beating him, screaming repeatedly that they were his things. Finally, hearing the commotion, Shelley rushed in, separated the boys, and moved the guest to the living room, leaving Derek alone to continue his peculiar play. When the classmate's mother arrived, Shelley covered up her son's violence, claiming there had been a minor incident. Once again, Derek's appalling behavior went unpunished. When Derek turned 9, Shelley started dating Robert. They were together for months before Robert met Derek, mainly because Shelley was terrified of her son's reaction to a new man in the house. When Robert finally met the child, he made an astonishingly strange first impression. He approached the boy, parted his hair, and began inspecting his scalp. When Shelley asked what he was doing, Robert smirked and said he was looking for the mark of 666 inches on Derek's head. It was a bizarre way for an adult to introduce himself to a volatile child. Shelley's reaction was even worse. Aware of her son's problems, she actually supported Robert's joke, agreeing that there was definitely a devil in Derek. Unsurprisingly, the man chose the absolute worst tone for his first meeting with his lover's son. From that moment, their relationship was doomed to worsen. Robert and Shelley married, and he moved into her house, immediately deciding it was his job to impose order and rules. In principle, discipline was desperately needed, but Robert took a heavy-handed, autocratic approach. He was incredibly strict from day one, giving orders and enforcing rules with an iron fist. Derek was around 10 years old and had never known discipline. His mother had always caved to his every desire. The boy could not fathom where this man came from, moving into his home and attempting to dictate his life. Naturally, Derek began to rebel fiercely, turning his wrath and dissatisfaction onto his mother. Instead of finally setting boundaries, Shelley did the opposite. She constantly tried to appease her son. When Robert wasn't around, she showered Derek with praise, gifts, and attention. Everything he wanted. She apologized for her husband's behavior, attempting to compensate for the discipline and new rules. Shelley was sending Derek wildly mixed signals. Robert was too hard, but she was impossibly soft. Now Derek simply waited for Robert to leave, then started to manipulate his mother. That Christmas, Shelley bought her son a new PlayStation. He had insisted on it for months and couldn't wait for Christmas morning. The moment he woke up, Derek rushed downstairs to the tree. He wanted to tear into his presents immediately, but Robert blocked him. The man insisted they would have breakfast together, as a proper family should, and then Derek could open his gifts. He forced the boy to the table and placed a plate of scrambled eggs, a food Derek despised, in front of him. Robert declared that Derek would not leave the table until the plate was empty. Predictably, Derek refused. He simply sat there, silently staring at the plate, not moving a muscle. He remained at the table the entire day. He didn't eat a single bite of the eggs or utter a single word. It was a silent, tension-filled protest against Robert. Christmas, a day of magic for many children, was utterly ruined for Derek. He went to bed without gifts, without celebration, and without food. Not a single crumb all day. The next day, Robert went to work, leaving just Derek and his mom. Shelley did what she always did. She apologized profusely for Robert's actions, trying to comfort and hug him, saying he could now open his presents. Derek walked slowly to the tree, opened his brand new PlayStation, and proceeded to destroy it. He broke everything he could, a pure expression of anger designed to punish his mother for what her husband had done. And what did Shelley do? The exact same thing she always did. She went to the store and bought him a second gaming console. In this Christmas scenario, it's impossible not to pity the boy, whose long-awaited holiday was cruelly taken away. The adults' behavior was inexcusable. Robert's actions bordered on abuse, and Shelley, instead of protecting her child, silently allowed it to happen. She should never have let Robert treat him that way, especially on Christmas. The contradictory chaos created by the adults was a breeding ground for psychological breakdown. It's no surprise Derek's fragile mind began to malfunction. Shelley desperately needed to establish boundaries and discipline. If she had, Robert would have had far less ammunition to use against the boy. Christmas passed, and the family dynamic only worsened. Derek grew into a teenager, and if before he only tolerated Robert and took his anger out on his mother, he now began to physically confront the man. Shelley was perpetually stuck between her husband and her son. She was too terrified to take a firm stance with Derek, knowing that the moment Robert left for work, she would be alone with an enraged teenager. Shelley felt like a prisoner in her own house. She was constantly walking on eggshells, desperate to avoid triggering the master of the house in his aggression. Meanwhile, she kept ignoring the elephant in the room, burying her head in the sand, hoping the situation would miraculously resolve itself. It didn't. Derek got older, and the clashes with Robert escalated. After every fight, Shelley would secretly praise her son and apologize for Robert's words and actions, continuing to smother Derek with love and attention, no matter his behavior. However, at one point, Shelley reached her breaking point and finally decided to try something. She took her son to a psychotherapist. Tragically, she was once again unlucky. Shelley found an unprofessional therapist. Without a proper evaluation, the doctor quickly diagnosed Derek with depression and ended the session. While the boy may have been depressed, it was unlikely his primary issue. Nevertheless, the doctor prescribed the teenager antidepressants and sent them away. Naturally, this only made things worse. Instead of improving, Derek retreated completely into himself, practically stopping all communication. He disconnected from reality and became even more isolated from his peers. Crucially, his anger and aggression did not vanish. They simply intensified. The medication was clearly unsuitable. A few more years passed. The bitter confrontation between Robert and Derek finally ended in the boy's favor. Shelley's husband couldn't take it anymore, and the couple separated. While other marital issues may have existed, the result was clear. Derek was now 18 and in his final year of high school. A pivotal moment occurred in Derek's life. He got a girlfriend. Derek had zero romantic experience and typically prevented anyone from getting close, let alone forming a friendship. However, this girl was drastically different from his peers. Her name was Macy McCullan. She attended his school but was 2 years younger, only 16, and the complete opposite of Derek. She was described as sweet, friendly, and extremely sociable, with plans to graduate and pursue a career in medicine. They say opposites attract, and the young couple instantly found common ground. It was incredible. Derek finally met someone he could be at ease and open up to. Shelley had never seen her son so happy. He became caring and attentive. A smile replaced his permanent scowl, and his aggression seemed to fade. His mother was overjoyed, having secretly feared he was incapable of love and would never be truly happy. At first, everything was wonderful. But shortly after their relationship began, 16-year-old Macy told Derek she was pregnant. The boy was initially in shock, unable to believe it. Yet the news actually thrilled him. He immediately told Macy he was ready to be a father and would do everything to ensure their child grew up healthy. It seemed Derek had finally found someone he could be himself with. When Shelley learned she would be a grandmother, she invited Macy to move in. Macy, who had lost her mother young and was raised by an often absent, hard-working father, agreed, knowing she'd need help with the baby. The young couple soon became engaged. 9 months later, Macy gave birth to a boy named Gabriel, and Derek and Shelley were ecstatic. From day one, the young man was genuinely invested in being a good father, completely adoring Gabriel. After finishing high school, Derek immediately became a stay-at-home dad, dedicating all his time to his son. He changed diapers, fed him, bathed him, played, and put him to bed. Macy returned to school, which took up much of her time, but Derek was happy to take on the majority of the responsibilities. For a time, everything was smooth. Everyone was content. But then, Derek's unusual behavior began to resurface. Now, like his mother's ex-husband Robert once did, Derek decided to establish a rigid routine in the house. As his son grew, Derek forced everyone to follow specific rules. Everything had to be done at a strictly designated time and in the same order. Everyone now had the same morning, day, and evening. For instance, one of the biggest points of contention was the curtains. For reasons unknown, Derek insisted on keeping them closed all day in every room, blocking natural light. Shelley, not used to living in perpetual darkness, would go downstairs and open them. Derek would instantly rush in, slam the curtains shut, and start a fight. Shelley, true to form, always backed down and gave in to her son. Derek enforced this strict adherence to his routine most heavily on Macy, constantly criticizing, yelling, or scolding her for doing anything incorrectly. After Gabriel's birth, Derek became incredibly controlling and started treating Macy demeaningly. He began dictating who she could see and where she could go. Macy was not allowed to take a single step without Derek's explicit permission. The only places she was permitted to go were school and a part-time job, after which she had to come straight home. To any sane person, it was clear Derek was crossing a line with his need to control everything. But Shelley simply watched, never interfering or attempting to protect Macy or tell Derek that his behavior was wrong and abusive. Shelley was simply terrified of her son. However, her inaction did not shield her from his wrath. On the contrary, Derek began to turn his anger on his mother, calling her a pathetic failure and mocking her alcoholism. After separating from Robert and mourning her perceived worthless life, Shelley had started drinking and soon couldn't get through a day without alcohol. The insults were incredibly painful, but the mother had neither the strength nor the desire to stand up to her son. She simply let Derek treat both her and Macy however he pleased. One day, returning home, Shelley walked into the kitchen and found her son sitting at the table with a firearm in his hands. He had purchased an AK-47, despite never showing any previous interest in weapons. Shelley was completely shocked. When she asked what was going on, Derek pointed the gun at his mother and gave her a chilling warning. She had better sleep with one eye open, because one night he would shoot her or slit her throat. In that terrifying moment, Shelley realized that the son she had loved and spoiled so much was fully capable of taking her life. She was in complete horror. When Derek wasn't home, she had a deadbolt installed on her bedroom door so her son couldn't enter at night. Shelley rarely left her room unless absolutely necessary. Her fears intensified when Derek started asking about her life insurance policy. The boy didn't want to be left without money if something happened to her. Shelley now felt like a true prisoner in her own home, and her alcoholism spiraled. She would lock herself in her room and drink, trying to escape her emotional trauma. But Macy and little Gabriel were also in the house, and Derek's fiancée bore the worst of the young man's domestic tyranny. One day, when Derek was out, the two women talked. They complained about his behavior and decided they needed to get rid of him. They felt they could manage with the child without him, and that Gabriel would be safer away from his worsening behavior. They planned to kick the only man out of the house, but quickly abandoned the idea because they were too afraid of him. Shelley also had a Labrador named Lucy. Derek hated the dog's fur and the mess she made. Soon after, Shelley went to the hospital for gallbladder surgery. When she returned, Lucy was missing. When she asked about the dog, Derek gave her a cold, chilling look, then casually claimed the dog was hit by a car, died at the vet, and was cremated. Shelley knew her son was lying. Lucy was a well-behaved adult dog and wouldn't run into the road for no reason. She believed Derek had simply gotten rid of the animal to hurt her, either abandoning her far from home or even shooting her in the woods. Yet the mother didn't confront Derek about his lie and remained silent. This nightmare went on for 2 years. Derek controlled every aspect of their lives, set all the rules, and intimidated the household. Macy and Shelley were trapped. Macy had just turned 18 and graduated high school when she decided she had finally had enough. Little Gabriel was now 2. Macy told Shelley she wanted to leave Derek, unable to endure the humiliation and abuse any longer. She was terrified he would hurt her if she tried to leave. She also knew that if she took Gabriel, Derek would lose control, but she couldn't possibly leave her son with a monster. In the end, after long planning, Macy simply walked out of the house and didn't return. She left her son with Shelley, sincerely believing Gabriel would be safer there. Once outside, Macy felt free. Unfortunately, her freedom was short-lived, as the story took a much darker turn. As soon as Derek returned home and realized Macy was gone, he displayed bizarre behavior. The first thing he did was open all the curtains, letting in sunlight, something he had vehemently opposed. Then he began pacing the living room, repeating the same phrase over and over: "I won't let another man be the father of my son." Although Gabriel was home, Derek was fixated on the idea that Macy was having an affair and that this man would raise his child. Shelley, as usual, watched from the sidelines and didn't intervene, simply worrying her son might do something foolish. She even called her ex-husband, Robert, for advice. Robert, wanting no part of the drama, dismissed it as probable depression and told her to leave Derek alone. On September 7, 2012, Shelley was out all day, attending an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. When she returned, Macy's car was parked in the driveway. Her first thought was doubt. It was unlikely the girl had returned voluntarily. Then Shelley noticed the front door was open, which caused her to panic. When she walked inside and saw a trail of blood running through the house, she initially calmed herself, thinking Derek had smashed a mirror and cut himself. She followed the trail down the hallway, which led to the bathroom. The door was closed, but a large pool of blood had seeped out from underneath it. Shelley flung the door open and froze. In the bathtub, covered in blood, lay Macy with her throat slit. It was too late. Shelley could do nothing. 18-year-old Macy McCullan was dead. Shelley's body went rigid with fear, feeling like she was in a horror movie. She had no doubt her son was the killer. Then she remembered her grandson, Gabriel. Could Derek have harmed his own child? Neither the boy nor Derek was in the house. Shelley immediately called emergency services. The police searched the house and took Shelley to the station. While officers asked standard questions, the distraught woman kept repeating that Derek had taken Gabriel. Then, a terrifying vision struck her. Her enraged son killing her grandson and then taking his own life. The vision was so clear that Shelley trembled with fear and immediately shared her suspicions. The police had no idea where Derek was or what he was capable of, only that he had likely fled with the boy. A massive search operation for the father and son began, desperate to find them before another tragedy occurred. Derek's face was broadcast across all the news. The search continued through the night. At 5 a.m. the next morning, a motel employee called the police. The wanted man had just checked into a room with a small child. Law enforcement officers rushed to the motel, armed and ready to apprehend the suspect, knowing he was armed and suspected of murder and kidnapping. The one crucial unknown was whether Gabriel was still alive. However, the situation resolved simply. As the team prepared to storm the room, Derek walked out with his hands raised. He had heard the noise and realized he couldn't escape, surrendering without a word. When they handcuffed him, 2-year-old Gabriel was found alive and unharmed inside the room. Derek was immediately taken in for questioning, but was first given the right to make a phone call. The young man called his mother, Shelley, and told her he was sorry things had turned out this way. He hadn't meant to do anything like that, but now nothing could be undone. At the end of the call, Derek, for the first time in his life, told his mother he loved her and asked her to take care of Gabriel. The investigation began immediately. Macy's blood was found on Derek's clothes and in his car. The young man hadn't even bothered to dispose of the murder weapon, the knife, perhaps knowing they would find him anyway. An autopsy revealed the sheer brutality of the attack. Macy's carotid artery and jugular vein were severed, and she had also been stabbed in the back. She had numerous defensive wounds on her hands, indicating she had fought back hard. The case was closed. All evidence pointed to Derek, and he was charged with intentional homicide. While Derek was in jail, Shelley, demonstrating the boundless nature of a mother's love, did everything she could to get her son out. She tried to fix the situation as she always had, even planning to testify in Derek's defense, not thinking that she could easily have been in Macy's place. Despite her efforts, there was simply too much evidence against him. Derek eventually took a plea deal in exchange for a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 40 years. But the story didn't end there. After the guilty verdict, Derek learned he would spend most of his life behind bars. He paid another inmate over $4,000 to act as a hitman to kill the man he believed Macy was having an affair with. Fortunately, the assassination attempt failed, but Derek was charged with attempted solicitation. After the trial, Shelley gained full custody of her grandson, Gabriel. Now, the most critical question was whether the woman could finally learn from her catastrophic parenting mistakes. Haunted by the scars of the past, Shelley couldn't return to her home. She stayed with a friend for a few days before moving out of town, keeping away from the media and the internet. She has since led a secluded life and has given only one interview, mentioning that she hasn't been able to find the strength to visit Macy's grave. A documentary about this story titled "Evil Lives Here, in the Grip of My Son" was made, where Shelley discusses Derek's childhood and the crime. She herself believes that her son didn't intend to kill Macy, but simply lost control and grabbed the knife. Derek Campos has since changed his name to Gabriel and is still serving a life sentence in a Wisconsin correctional facility. Online discussions about who is truly to blame continue. Some condemn the mother for indulging her son's every whim and failing to hold him accountable. Others defend her, citing that many parents make mistakes without their children becoming murderers. So what was the decisive factor in this case? Was it poor parenting, or did nature play a cruel trick on Derek, making him inherently aggressive and unable to control his emotions? If you've finished watching, you're a real true crime fan. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell notifications, and hit the like button. See you in the next video.